Hey everyone, Chris here. Thanks a lot for clicking on the Sabbatical Story channel. The point of today's video is really all about decision making. You know, when we think about every single day, every one of us makes hundreds of decisions, and some of those decisions are important and others are seemingly insignificant, like what you're going to have for lunch today. But at the end of the day, all the decisions that we make add up to the story of our life. So when we're talking about taking a sabbatical, you know, there's a lot of decisions that lead up to being able to take a sabbatical from a financial and a psychological standpoint. So that is what today's discussion is all about, is decoding how it is that we make decisions so that we can make better decisions. So that leads us to the OODA Loop. The OODA Loop was actually put together by a man by the name of John Boyd, and he was a fighter pilot. And he developed the OODA Loop to improve fighter pilot results when fighting an enemy under very fast unfolding circumstances in the face of adversity and ambiguity. So today, the OODA Loop is used by elite organizations, parts of the government, and the military around the world. And now we are going to use the OODA Loop to help us make better decisions as well. So let's go through the OODA Loop. What is it? The OODA Loop is a decision-making process. OODA stands for observe, orient, decide, act. Now, there's just a few things we need to know about the OODA Loop in order to use it effectively. So let's go a little bit deeper. When we're observing, we're essentially taking in information from any source that's around us. When we orient, which is the next step, we're trying to make sense of that information. In other words, what does it mean? And how do you put it together so that we can do something constructive with that information? The third is to decide. We have to then decide what is it that we're going to do based on that information. And then of course we need to act. Act is kind of almost like an experiment. You have an output of whatever that is that we made a decision on, and that in and of itself becomes an observation, because whenever you make a decision, you have an outcome. And an outcome will be either a good outcome or a bad outcome or something in the middle. And that, in and of itself, becomes an observation, hence the loop. That's why it's called an OODA loop. So the outcome becomes an observation and you run through the process again. So technically speaking, the OODA loop is a constantly self-improving decision-making process. But there's still more that we need to understand about the OODA loop to make it effective to us. Let's go back to the observe column. When we're observing, we are going to get good, factual information. It's information that is good, we can use it, and it can be put to practice right away. You're also going to be getting bad information. It's either completely untrue or completely out of context and thus unusable for the given situation. Next, we're going to have missing information. And that's either because you didn't know to get the information, hence you don't know what you don't know, or the information just simply isn't available. The next issue that we could possibly have with the OODA loop is information inundation. And that happens a lot in our society today, where we are completely saturated with TV and radio and billboards and advertisements and things along those lines that saturate us with input. And that's why it's so difficult sometimes to make good decisions. But more on that in just a second. And next, we're also going to have incomplete information. So we're going to get bits and pieces of something that we're going to have to fill in the gaps later to try to make sense of it. And then you've also got information that may be factual, but completely out of context. And then next, of course, we've got uncertainty. This is when we get information that we're not sure if it's real or not. We don't know if it's factual or not. And that becomes a part of that potential inaccuracy that has an effect on how you orient, which is coming up here in just a second, and ultimately make decisions on. Let's go to the next column for orient. When we orient, we are orienting that information based upon existing models. That the more models that you have, the better decisions that you can make going forward. And that's great if you have a model. When we're talking about taking a sabbatical, you may not necessarily have a good model to use. So the next one is super important. And if you get anything out of the OODA Loop discussion today, it should be this. The next step in the orient phase is to accept the brutal truth of whatever situation that we're talking about. And really what that means is whenever you're gathering information, there's two ways that we interpret that information and orient that information. Number one is the actual information itself, the actual fact that we see. But the second one is the filter that we apply to that information. So that's kind of dubbed what is versus what should be. So here's how I'd like to explain this. In the first two videos that I put out, video number 1 and video number 2, it was about the sabbatical money mindset. And the goal of it was to separate the deep financial beliefs that we have in our life with who we identify ourselves with. And if you go back and watch those videos, what I'm talking about there is this the reason why we buy expensive cars and expensive houses, because it's a part of our identity, because the concept of money is so deep inside of our psyche. So when we take a look at taking a sabbatical, we think, how in the heck am I going to afford to take a sabbatical? I've got a huge mortgage and I've got car payments and I've got these expenses and we've got all this stuff. Well, the brutal truth is that the decisions that you made up to this point have put you in that situation, and it's not your fault. I'm going to go into why you did that in just a few minutes. And I'm not calling you out per se, because this is what we did. We went through this. So guys, that is the reason why video number 1 and number 2 was all about breaking the mindset, the connection between money and identity, so that we can get to the OODA Loop today and explain why I did that. That's why this is really where it all comes together, where we're breaking that mindset down and we can look at the brutal truth about why we can or cannot take a sabbatical and how we can start to make different choices to get us there. And the next one that kind of goes right along with this is the social norms. This is a big one, because this is something that my wife and I struggle a lot with. Taking a sabbatical is not normal in American society. Kind of like in my last video where I kind of explained the expectations of our life. Our life is, we're expected to work every day, 40 hours a week until we turn 65 years old, and then we're permitted to live our days the way we want, right? Taking a sabbatical is against the social norms of our society, and so there's a little bit of that social apprehension. Whenever you decide to do something like this, your friends and your family might say, well, what are you doing? You can't just take off, for a year. I mean, what about your career? What about money? What about your, whatever, fill in the blank, right? So you've got a little bit of adversity whenever you do something unorthodox against the social norms in our society. And then finally, in the orient phase is analysis. In the analysis phase, we're really analyzing all this information that we got in. And again, in the 21st century, we get tons of it from TV and radio and everything else like that. So we've got a lot of noise to sift through. We've got to get through all this information to get to what's real. That is a big reason why we make the decisions that we do, is because our OODA Loop is being filled from outside influences rather than inside. But more on that in just a second. Now, next column is to decide. When we're deciding, we're really taking all the information from what we've observed and how we've oriented to try to make the best sense of what we're going to do with that information and to decide what to do. And then finally, when we're acting, we're going to have an outcome, and hits the loop here again. And this act is a testing phase. We're essentially testing how good did we orient all the information that we got. And of course, at the end of the day, if you don't act, then the whole OODA Loop falls apart, unless inaction is actually a decision. Now, something that goes beyond the OODA Loop that my wife and I have discovered makes the OODA Loop even more powerful. And I have not found in my research any place on the internet that really talks about what I'm going to tell you right now. And this is huge bonus information for you. And that is the effect of mindset over the OODA Loop. Let me explain. When our inputs for our observations, when we're gathering information, comes exclusively from the same places, TV, radio, propaganda, billboards, even movies, celebrities, all forms of entertainment essentially give you the same information. Those constant sources of information close the OODA loop. In other words, you get the same information in, you orient the same way, you make the same or similar decisions and make the same or similar actions, and so we stay on this hamster wheel. We never really take that sabbatical that we really wanted. That creates a closed loop. The reason we have a closed loop is because of this this tidal wave of information washing over us from the same places every single day. The mindset in that situation is passive. What that means is that we're always just receiving. We don't have time to really look into, does all this information and all these things that we're being inundated with line up to our core values, the things that we truly want for our life? Oftentimes the answer is no. If you're going to take a sabbatical, like what we did, you have to start making very different decisions to free yourself from that hamster wheel. Essentially, we have been taught to have a passive mindset with this inundation of information at every corner. How do we fix that? The only way to do it, I've found, and my wife, of course, together, when we have decided to take a sabbatical, we had to take an active mindset. In other words, you have to shut down and silence all that noise. We actually turned off our TV. We don't have cable anymore. We don't pay for any of that stuff anymore. We don't listen to it anymore. We spent that time learning, and we learned what we needed to do to get on the right track, to free ourselves, and to take a sabbatical like we're on right now. In order to have an active mindset, you must seek the information that you want versus just blindly and passively receiving from the propaganda machine in the world that we live in today. If you turn that off and you begin seeking rather than just accepting, it will change the whole OODA loop. It'll change the information coming into the OODA loop so that you can reorient yourself differently, so that you can make better decisions and better actions and a complete change in your life. We're going to have more on how to have an active mindset coming up very soon. Well, guys, that is the OODA loop and the mindset that influences the information coming into the OODA loop. You guys have a great day, and remember, I'll see you on sabbatical.